Welcome to Season 5 of the Big Sci-Fi Podcast with Adina, Brian, Cris, and Steve, the biggest sci-fi podcast in the galaxy. The adventure is just beginning here at the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, and we invite you to come aboard the Starship Tangent. We know you'll enjoy the conversation, the laughter, the banter back and forth, and most of all, friends who love hanging out to talk about all things science fiction. Set your phasers to fun. Here we go.
Welcome, everyone, to a thrilling episode of our podcast where we have the honor of hosting Christopher D. Abbott, an author whose work spans the realms of crime, fantasy, science fiction, and horror. As a reader's favorite award-winning author and an Amazon bestseller for his Sherlock Holmes, The Watson Chronicles series, Abbott stands out as a master storyteller. Now, before I carry on, I just want to remind our listeners out there to do all that stuff that helps podcasts like ours get noticed. Like it, review it, share it on your platform of choice. And a big shout out to our parent network, Trek Geeks. Back to Cris, who has contributed significantly as a Star Trek feature writer for Screen Rant, where he delves into the intricacies of the universe from Discovery to Picard. His insightful articles, such as exploring potential Voyager character comebacks in Discovery and retconning TNG's Romulans and Borg history, have resonated with Trekkies worldwide. Now, Star Trek is not the only place where Cris shines. Cris is celebrated for his faithful adherence to the spirit of Conan Doyle in his Sherlock Holmes novels and novellas. He's also collaborated with esteemed authors like Aaron Rosenberg, who edits the Cases by Candlelight series, Michael Jan Friedman, and Keith R. DeCandido, who was a guest here on the Big Sci-Fi a few months ago, by the way, and to expand the Holmes universe. And now in 2024, he teams up with Keith again for not only Cases by Candlelight Volume 3 with Aaron and Mike, but as editor of Chris's brand new Sherlock Holmes anthology, Eliminate the Impossible, which features non-traditional stories from Keith, Cris, the amazing Mary Fan, and Derek Tyler Attico, the author of the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. Wow. So Cris, welcome.
Wow, thank you. What an introduction. I appreciate that.
We like to embarrass, our guests with the introduction. That's kind of one of our goals.
It's one of the best introductions I've ever had. So thank you very much.
So speaking of introductions, how did you get introduced to science fiction?
Oh, through the television series Doctor Who. That was my first real, first sort of science fiction, history fiction, a little science horror fiction, all of that kind of embodied in that as a child. I was born in the mid-70s, so 80s was my time. And yeah, I grew up from that. And then from there, obviously, I branched out and found other TV shows and so on that I quite liked. But Star Trek was introduced. I was introduced to Star Trek by my uncle, and we saw The Wrath of Khan. And that was where I went from there, because I was too young for the first film. So I had to watch it. I had to watch all the 507 iterations of it later, which I quite like, most of them. Yeah, very good.
So from that film, did you go back and watch the original series, or was it like Next Gen that you got into?
I think I got into Next Gen first. I had watched, I was a Star Trek fan before Next Gen because I liked the original series films. So I followed all the films. I did go back and watch the original series when I was younger, and I must admit, because we didn't have streaming and all that sort of stuff, it was really, if it was on television, I got to see it. But most of the places that were renting videos and so on were doing like seasons of the Next Gen, because I lived in the UK, so we were like 4 years behind you guys at that time. The fourth season of Next Gen TNG was on when we were starting to get the first season in the UK.
Right. So what I find fascinating about that is because you and I are quite literally like just about exactly the same age.
Yeah.
But we grew up an ocean apart.
Yeah.
And so, in theory, you'd think we'd have a similar experience with media. No, because we were in completely different countries. So it's interesting because I would expect you to have, I guess, a similar experience to me. But if you're delayed, that's a big difference.
Yeah, I think it was delayed. And I think the thing is, like I said, back in the UK, we didn't have, until the 90s when we got cable and started to be able to
Mhm.
get channels from the US. So we got more frequent US type TV, which was fabulous because we'd never seen it. I'd never seen any of these things before.
Yeah.
But Star Trek specifically, yeah, we were well behind on that. And then when I did finally get caught up, I found Deep Space Nine, and as soon as I found that series, I knew it would be my all-time favorite, and it is.
Chris, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If your first inkling of Star Trek was watching The Wrath of Khan
Yeah.
and not having watched the original series,
Right.
the effect of who is this guy named Khan? Why does he hate Kirk so much? Why does he want to extract revenge? Was it difficult to, or did you just say, oh, this is a nice story? And then when you went to watch the original series and you saw Space Seed, you went, aha, that's why he's such an angry person.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I had not seen the Space Seed episode, so I didn't really have any idea who this Khan character was and so on. My uncle was very good at explaining things to me when I was a bit, unsure of what was going on. But generally speaking, I went into it blind. So I loved the story and I thought it was great. And then I think the very, very, very minimal backstory that Chekhov gives to the captain, forget his name now.
Terrell?
Terrell, thank you. Yeah. Was enough, I think, to get the impression. And of course, as soon as you see Khan, the first thing he does is he tortures them. So immediately his character.
He's the bad guy.
I adored everything about that film, The Wrath of Khan. I just, because it was horror in space as well. Especially the scene when you hear McCoy say something like "Rigger hasn't set in long." They can't have been dead long. And you think, this is Star Trek. This is like, but yeah, because these things really happen. So I liked that, and I liked I don't know. I feel like when I went back and watched the original series, I really did enjoy it, but I felt the seriousness of the Nicholas Meyer versions were much more in keeping with what I preferred than the more sort of flying things in the sky and stuff.
Okay. No, that's good. That's good. And it's interesting because again, watching them in a certain order helps, but not having that, and the fact that the movie, you didn't have that order and you enjoyed Wrath of Khan on its own, shows that it is on its own a great movie, and that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. Like I grew up with Wrath of Khan as one of my all-time childhood favorite films without having seen Space Seed until seeing it in high school. And I'm like, now I get the context.
Okay.
But I felt like you're right, Chris, that Chekhov explaining it to Terrell and then seeing Khan doing his Khanness, you basically already know what you need to know
to
enjoy it.
And I think there was some interesting articles about that, and we talked about this before on another subject, but it was the Chekhov point, well, Chekhov wasn't in that episode, so how did he know? And he never, well, the reality is that we kind of know that Chekhov perhaps was, and that he was in, like, say, security, and he was in a nominal position, and he would have probably been one of the security guards that, got rid of Khan off the ship or whatever that. And I think, yeah, that's cool. I'm good with that, because Khan wouldn't forget his face, would he?
No,
right.
No.
So he was there. Exactly. That's the way I always took it. Yeah. So that's the way I always took it. Yeah, that's the way I always took it. Like, if he didn't forget a face, then he was there.
So growing up as a science fiction fan, okay, what was the path from that to writing for Screen Rant, writing anything, really? How did you go from growing up to writing?
I guess I should preface this by saying that I'm a dyslexic author, so I suffer with dyslexia. And when I was a kid, of course, this wasn't really recognized, other than that, the average kind of 80s playing the fool, Christopher can do well, but lacks the confidence he needs to do it and all that stuff. And I think but I was always interested in writing stories. And then I was very fortunate to meet an English teacher at college who recognized that I had dyslexia and immediately structured the course I was doing for that, and made it really possible for me to sort of succeed at some things, which was enough for my confidence. I always wanted to write, but I never felt I was capable of doing it. And then I was working on my first book, which was Sir Lawrence Dies, and it took 8 or 9 years to write that book. But I never really written a book, and I didn't really know how. So I decided to write the dialogue first, because I thought, well, why don't I just do that? It's a murder mystery book, and I just have them. So that book itself, in essence, was taken from like any of these investigative serials that I'd watched, Monk and a few other things. And I'm like, I like the way they do that. I like
cool.
Poirot. I like Holmes, so I thought, let me see if I can, figure out how I could do it, but also do it in that format that feels like it would work repetitively rather than just a one-off. So that's where I got to. But the real draw, I think, these shows, science fiction shows and so on, got me into reading, because I wanted to read more about those shows. So the crossovers, so like the V series, I read books from that. I've read supernatural books. I've read all of the crossover tie-in type books, and that's what really made me want to write. That and the question was, I was a huge mystery fan. Would I be able to write a convincing murder mystery that somebody could say, I never saw that coming, and at the end, yes. Could I do that? And so the answer was, well, let's give it a go. And I did.
So have you read folks like Agatha Christie and?
Yes. I mean, I grew up at a very young age. My dad was very keen to get me into reading, and I used to get my bike and go down to the library and get out a book. But yes, I read things like, the first book I tried to read was The Fellowship of the Ring, and I didn't do too well. So I was sent back to the library to get The Hobbit, got that, and then I was on my way. But in the interim period, The Hobbit was out. I had to wait. They said, do you like mystery? This lady, do you like murder mystery? I didn't know. So I'm like, sure. So she gave me an Agatha Christie book, the first book, which was Lord Edgware Dies. So that's where I got my title for. So that's where I got my title for that book, Sir Lawrence Dies, because I liked it. It was just so simple. Like, nobody's going to ask me what it's about. Somebody dies. I mean, that's it. So, but yeah, that's what really got me involved. And then I started to read tie-in fiction, and I started to read people like Peter David, Michael Jan Friedman, all of the regulars of that, Keith DeCandio, like all doing crossover tie-in stuff. And I just wanted to do it too.
Nice.
It's amazing.
Nice.
So I've had a question about sort of the mystery process. Like you were talking about, I don't know if I could write a convincing mystery. How do you find, like, how do you go about creating a mystery and then having the reveal be surprising, but not so like out of nowhere that doesn't seem possible, but not so obviously a twist?
Yes, good question. I think the best answer for that is that what I do is, obviously I outline as best as I can. I do allow in my outline for a change of direction as it happens. I allow quite a lot, but mostly I have already completed the beginning and end in my head. So when it's if it's more than a novella, which is around 40,000 words, if it's like a novel, 90,000 words, this is my process, right? I write the beginning, I write till about the middle of the book, I then write the end, I then bridge. And that way it feels like that way it feels like I have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the bridge from the end.
Okay.
But when I finished, then I go back and I see I don't know why I came up with this, like, figures and stuff, but I go back and see 3 clues in every chapter. Like, I don't know why it suddenly became 3 clues, but that's what I do. So that my idea is that out of context, they mean nothing to you. But once you know the solution, if you then read the book again, you should see all these little things that will be like, I missed that the first time around, because I always feel like people will read the book twice if they liked it the first time, and maybe the second time you want something in there that they didn't see because they had no context for it. So
Very good.
Okay, that's amazing, because in my head, not having written anything, in my head, writing a mystery novel would seems to be the hardest genre, just because you have to do all those things of, you have to find the clues, make the clues believable but interesting, find the reveal interesting enough that it's shocking but also believable. I'm like, I can't think of a more daunting task.
No, and you're right. And, you were always at the mercy of the last success, so if you did well at the last one, people were going to say, oh, I'll take a chance on this one because that was okay. And then you'll get inevitably that one person who says, that was a little disappointing. It wasn't quite as good as the last book. And so it's tough. I mean, I've written over 20 specific single Sherlock Holmes stories. And so 20 of them with 20 different plots as best as I can, because, after a while, these things start to recycle. And then, so I have to be aware that whatever solution I come up with for this story, it cannot have been the solution for any other at all. Like, it can't even be remotely like it. And that's how I try and keep it fresh.
And how do you keep track of? I was going to say.
Well, I was going to ask, have you read all of Arthur Conan Doyle's original Sherlock Holmes?
Yes, I have. I've read, all 62 stories. Yeah.
All 62 stories in one exciting book, kids, right here.
I actually have like this.
I need to check that out.
I have this an annotated Holmes book. It's like 4 inches thick and it's like this big. I found it at my local refuse place. They had like a little shed that people had donated stuff, and they said, books and stuff. Of course, books. I'm in, and this thing was, I couldn't believe it. It's like, it weighs about 5-10 pounds. I mean, it's a ridiculously heavy book, but I think it's important when you come up with ideas that you allow yourself the time to develop them. You allow yourself the time to recognize that it may not work the way you hoped, and also, because I don't have a shortage of ideas, I try to wrap 1 or 2 ideas together so that I'll give you an example. The Haunted Mansion was originally a Sherlock Holmes story with a sub-story that was about Watson's past. But as I developed the story, the Watson story became the prominent story. And the secondary part of that story was that they go to India, and while they're there, Holmes solves a case. But it's mostly about Watson. So that's where sometimes I try and change it up a little bit. And it's easy when you've got a guy, that's the guy narrating. He can say what he wants. He's telling you the story. So, and I always assume he lies anyway.
I guess one other thing I wanted to ask, if you had, in terms of research and reading, have you read Nancy Springer's Enola Holmes stuff?
No, I admit I have not read any of it. I want to. I've seen, obviously, the adaptations on Netflix. Fabulous.
Yes, I loved it.
I adore all the characters and all the actors, and I think they had a great ensemble. I mean, like, what a quirky pair, all of them, the mother, the whole lot, So I haven't read it. I do intend to, but here's the thing: I have like a stack of books, like to the ceiling, of things that I need to read, and I just keep adding to it and writing.
Yeah, well, it's because we all know collecting books is it's a very separate hobby from reading the books.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I go to every event like you, and I come away with like all my friends' latest books. Like, that's how it works. That's how I get my books, Yep.
I just want to say, I did meet Nancy Springer at Balticon. I think it was 2 years ago. She was the guest of honor.
Oh,
and
wow.
We were in the green room together. I'm trying to remember our specific interaction, but it resulted in her calling me very young in a way that was like very like, thank you. Because I don't always feel old. I'm not old, but I'm not young. And so having other people tell you, really you are, and looking at it from that perspective, it was kind of cool. She was very lovely.
Yeah, I would love to meet her.
Yep. Excellent. So what? So how did your desire for writing turn into Sherlock Holmes out of all the things?
Right.
Like, why in that universe as opposed to completely inventing your own universe? Why Sherlock Holmes?
Well, I guess 2 solid reasons. One of them is it sells.
That's good.
And the first Sherlock Holmes book I put out did more in that first month than I did in a year in some of my other books. So I thought, and I talked to Mike Friedman, because I wanted to see if I could place it in with a different publisher. He recommended I keep it for myself and publish it, self-publish it, which I did. But I had an editor do all the editing, professional editor Scott Pearson does all my editing, and he's a Simon and Schuster editor too, because he also edits all the Star Trek books. So I'm pretty connected with him. I got that through Mike and friends, but so it's really important that whatever money I spend on that project had to be on the editing. Like that's the key thing. But it did really, really well. So, but what happened is in the UK, 75 years for the copyright. So in the UK, Holmes is in the public domain, but in the US, it's 100 years. And there were still stories that were counted in the up to 2024 now.
Oh, wow.
So, but when I first wrote that first one, it was 1999, and there was no way I could publish it unless I published it through an actual publisher. So I put it aside and forgot about it. And then 20 years later, I'm like, oh, is that a story? And I checked, and it's in the public domain, and I could publish it. And I'm like, great. So I had it edited, and I did it, and yeah. So that's why. But the real reason I like the Sherlock Holmes, I think, more than say, like, my favorite is Poirot, but I just couldn't write one. It requires a level of skill that I don't think I have. I did write 2 of my own, and they're Agatha Christie-esque, I would say, because the person, the investigator, uses psychology, but in the 1930s, so we can't really, call it that. That's a newfangled thing, So he's not really a criminal psychologist because they didn't have them then. But that's kind of like what he calls himself, a psychologist and so on. But I did that because of Poirot. But honestly, the Holmes stuff just came to me one time, and I had a knack for it, and I don't really know. I didn't do anything special to learn it. I'm just, I guess, a little OCD. So I make a lot of lists, and then I like the repetitive nature of the fact that he solves every crime, but he also does it in such a way that is interesting and intelligent, rather than sit there and say, well, I heard 2 people say this and I got that from it, which is still clever. Don't get me wrong. But, there's something about him picking up his magnifying glass and saying, oh, look, there's a fingerprint on the door and or whatever. I like that stuff.
So is there any tie-in to the fact that in Star Trek The Next Generation, they did a lot of Sherlock Holmes on the holodeck? Did that happen to, like...
Yes.
Is that a factor?
Yes. The factor with LeVar Burton and Brent Spiner playing those 2 characters was just amazing. I loved Moriarty too, and I loved that they brought him back in Picard, even though
so good.
Just momentary.
But he had such a good amount of dialogue. He had something. I think what I liked about this new series of Picard, so jumping off to one side for a second, is that they gave all of those actors time to talk to each other a little. I mean, that fabulous scene between Riker and Troy in the brig, whatever. Where
oh my God, that's my
so good.
favorite scene of the entire series is that moment together where they're realizing they're going to die.
Yeah.
But they're going to die together, and it's it's beautiful.
I thought that's it, and I like that kind of. I'm a character-driven author, so I write a lot of character-based stuff, a lot of dialogue. I'm not like Stephen King, who does like whole chapters of just description. I can't write like that because I like my stories to be fast-paced. I like you to be able to move along with them, and I've done that. Regardless of the genre I'm writing in. My sci-fi book, the big one for Crazy 8, the one I did for Progenitor, turned into like the craziest sci-fi horror I've ever written in my life. I think Alien meets the War of the Worlds, and I think you've got a good idea. It's set in the 1930s, and they escape this calamitous thing and lock themselves in with something even worse. So it was fun, but I think that was an accumulation of all the things I'd seen in Star Trek, in science fiction, in crime shows like CSI and stuff, because there was a CSI Sherlock Holmes episode, and that was the first episode I ever saw. So I've had a bit of a Holmes fixation for a while.
There's a CSI episode about Sherlock Holmes? I've got to watch that.
Season 5, I think episode 7.
I can't remember.
Yeah, the original CSI. Yeah, cool. It starts off that they're actually in a room where they've like and there's Holmes with his pipe and everything, and it's just like a fan. They get together, they dress up, but it was cool because they went the Sherlock Holmes route with it, which I thought was fun.
Well, that's cool.
Since we've mentioned TV and other shows, is there a particular, or is there what's your favorite Sherlock Holmes movie, or what is your favorite version? Because there's been you've had Cumberbatch play him, you've got you've had so many different movies and different actors and playing different versions of it. Is there one that you go, yeah, that's the one I like the best, or that's the one that's most entertaining of the films or TV shows that were about Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah, I write for Jeremy Brett, who played Sherlock Holmes in the 1980s and 90s for a TV series called Granada Television. He is essentially what he's considered to be the kind of like the epitome of what that character is, And I write, my stories are my interpretation of his interpretation of the character, so I want him, so if Jeremy Brett does a quirky thing that is out of character for Sherlock Holmes, but he does it, then as far as I'm concerned, it's in character for his Sherlock Holmes. Okay. So that's the truth. I'm a big fan of quite a lot of the Sherlock Holmes stuff, and I've not really, I'm starting my own non-traditional. Sherlock Holmes could be a blade of grass and a wasp, who knows, but the point is I like all the variations of it. I love the Enola Holmes, but I didn't care for the Robert Downey Jr. films so much. I liked the concept of the steampunk idea, and of course some of the actors in it were really good, but I'm not sure he was right for the role. In fact, if they had switched Jude Law for Holmes and Downey for Watson, I think that would have worked very, very.
Can I make a recommendation of a Sherlock Holmes film that is completely off the beaten track?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Go for it.
It's called They Might Be Giants. Came out in 1970 or 71.
I'm writing that down.
George C. Scott playing the part of a judge who is not completely sane, but thinks he's Sherlock Holmes, and his psychiatrist that they send him to, whose name is Dr. Watson, and played by Joanne Woodward. It's a sweet, wonderful film, and it's one of my favorite films of all time. They Might Be Giants, because you get to see this person play the character he wants to be, which is Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. Because he wants justice in the world and fairness. And so I recommend that to you if you have a chance to see it.
I've written that down. I think one of the most important things about the character of Sherlock Holmes is that it is completely genre free. You can put Sherlock Holmes anywhere and he or she or they will work. And I think that is one of the most versatile things about that character. You can have him in a holodeck episode on you can have him Doctor Who meet him. I mean, like, it doesn't matter. It can be as whimsical or as silly as you like, because Sherlock Holmes was like one of the first superheroes. He just didn't wear a cape. And Watson wasn't an idiot. He was just standing next to the most intelligent man in the room, always, and I think that's important. And the sci-fi connection with that, really, like, even horror films, like they started doing Jason films in the 32nd century because, of course, he's a demon and can come whenever he wants. So what does time matter to him? But I like that even the genres are crossing over the last 30 years, how everything is crossing. But have you noticed that the stable seems to have been whatever the Star Trek period of time, whatever show it was, that became like everybody needed to copy that. Because that was and I think we saw that in other shows later on that said, we want Star Trek from the 90s again rather than Star Trek from the 2020s. I don't really understand any of that, but yeah. But you have to change, I think, and that's important. You stick Sherlock Holmes in something, people are interested.
Yeah, it is, and again, Cumberbatch doing the series Sherlock, which is very entertaining.
I loved it.
Yeah, yes, and the guy who played Moriarty was just fantastic.
He
was so really good. So I mean, you can do these. You can put them in the current time. You can play with them in the past, whatever. It is a very versatile. The concept of him is the big thing, and that's where you as long as you stay in that realm, people, as you said, they're going to like it and want to read it, and it's made you some money, I guess.
Well, and precipitantly, when you look at different genres and you look at different stories, that main idea of somebody clever and somebody beside them to ask the questions that we want to ask has, as a format, has worked across so many platforms. I mean, it's exactly exactly the Doctor Who thing, that he has a companion so that he can be clever, and they can ask, "What's happening, Doctor?" And the same in Star Treks and stuff. When they go on away missions, you'll get that one person that's always asking the questions because they're the audience. They're us. Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Well, that's the way you avoid exposition, is you have someone in the story who doesn't have the same knowledge, and then I feel like that's kind of like a not a trick, but like it's how you can info dump without info dumping.
Yes, and the other thing I quite like is also lists, where a character can read out a list. I learned something, some little tips that Agatha Christie did when she was writing to try and not just misdirect you, but completely confuddle you. And that was like, in one paragraph, she would mention gun, revolver, bullet, gunpowder. Like you're just being like an assault on your mind with all this stuff, so that then you can't think anything else. It has to be a gun. It has to be a gun. And then at the end, it's a knife. And you go, whoa, wow. And I think I learned things like this. She was a very clever woman, but she said the human brain, short-term memory, of course, is only capable of holding a certain amount. And lists, apparently, you give somebody a list. And we've seen this if you watched the Generation game, if that was on here, where all these things go past you on a conveyor belt, and then you have to remember as many of them and win them at the end. That's kind of the same thing. You've just got to remember all this stuff, you know?
Yeah, that's really
amazing.
neat.
So when you're writing Sherlock Holmes, do you have like a set of rules that you have to follow to make sure that it's within the character or within how we think of Sherlock Holmes, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Initially, yes, because I wrote down, I went through all my research on the character to find out what he likes and doesn't like, because every now and then you might want to add something in there, like he doesn't like fish. No one knew that before. Yay. So I did that. Now, after doing it for 4 years, pretty much all the way through, I don't think so much now. I think I know the character well enough. I also know the character well enough to take some liberties with him as well. I never want to redesign someone else's characters. So Holmes and Watson are Conan Doyle's, and that's it. They don't change. That's it. But all the characters around, I mean, I added nearly 80% of the characters into all my stories are mine, so I can use them again and I can do what I want with them, and I'm not restricted. You have to use Lestrade every now and then. You have to use these people, But I think one of the most interesting things about that Star Trek episode, when they picked Data as Sherlock Holmes, was just, it was obvious. Like, this is the walking, talking, thinking machine, as he is described by Watson, more to a calculator than a human being. Well, this is Data. What a clever concept, and just say, well, let's take that step forward and then make him Sherlock Holmes and give him all of that data. And at one point, I think Geordie says something like, you knew that, right? Like, and he went, no, the whole point of this is I didn't know anything and I have to do these deductions. And he just assumed that Data knew, but in fact, he didn't. He did all those deductions and discovered it.
But what's really interesting right now about that particular episode is how we think about AI and it churning and spitting out things that are kind of known versus actually doing something original. And that's actually one of the current open debates, is whether or not, I don't like to call them AI, I call them advanced algorithms, whether the advanced algorithm is truly coming up with something new, or is it just churning out some version of what it's seen before, which is it's interesting how that's the kind of one of the things that they touched on in that episode like 30 something years ago.
Because they foresee.
Do you mean?
Go ahead,
oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah,
I was just going to say that just because I think the people who were creating the pads and all that stuff in Star Trek in the 90s, and I think they knew that whatever they created, someone was going to love it and try and recreate it. But we've had iPads since then. We've had all sorts of technology that we can visually say, this came from Star Trek. Like, why would they make it look like that? And so on. So I think there's so much in it that crosses with our real life. It's why we still talk about it all the time,
Oh, sure. Oh, Chris, were you going to?
I was going to say, were you talking specifically about the the whole discussion that Dr. Pulaski has, where she's like, you're not, like, she doesn't say you're a phony, but like when the computer starts generating images and then Data's able to connect those images to other things, she's like, well, you just saw that symbol, so that's how you figured it out, like that kind of
well,
thing.
in the kind of in the concept of, you have an algorithm that took in input. So in this case, took in all of the known Sherlock Holmes stories and produced something that was really elements from what it took in.
Yeah.
It didn't actually make anything original about it. It just, repurposed elements, versus an algorithm that could do something in the style, but be actually original. And having that discussion of whether that was possible or not, it was just interesting, because that's kind of the discussion we're having today about advanced algorithms and what they're capable of.
I think that at some point, AI, whatever you refer to it, is here to stay, and we're going to have to come alongside it and see where we fit. I don't think it's not capable of writing an original story right now. I don't think, not totally original, not with a critical eye of a human being who says, well, this is similar to that, maybe I should make a tweak. The computer AI system, as intelligent as it is at the moment just reproducing a sort of idea based on other ideas, which is what we do too. The difference is from my perspective is it cannot tell if it's plagiarized anything unless it does a check by check on everything. The other thing is, it doesn't know if it's good.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I finish a story, I kind of know if it's good, and I kind of know if it's bad too. And I think one of the things that I've noticed, because most of my work now, certainly the Holmes work, is self-published, so I do all my own work. I do my own publishing and so on. And I've seen things like Amazon saying, "Oh, well, we're going to reduce the number of books you can publish in a day by like 3
because of that."
Because people are creating 100 stories and they're uploading them and selling them for 90 cents and selling them. That's where it is. Yeah.
So speaking of the other human authors, you worked a little bit with Michael Jan Friedman and Keith.
Yep.
I mean, and especially, I feel like I've been aware of Michael Jan Friedman since I was in college or something, when he started writing. Like I think I have some of his first novels on my shelf. So what was it like to collaborate with these guys?
Oh, well, first of all, you know what it's like being a fanboy, and then you're fanboying over the authors you were reading when you were a kid, and now they want to write stories for you. No, my first meeting with Mike happened at a convention I went to in New York. I was friends, or am friends, with Chase Masterson, and I did some work for her charity stuff, and she got me introduced to Aaron Eisenberg, and we became friends. And so he got me at this gig. He said, I'll get you there, bring your books, sell some books. I'd never done anything like it. And they put me next to Mike Friedman and Dave Stern, two of the most prolific writers. And all it had on a piece of card was MJF, and it was on the table. And he sat down and slowly put out like 1,000 books, and there's me with my one and fairy lights. But yes, I think from that moment on, I developed a friendship with Mike and realized that they're people like the actors. You meet them and you're all starstruck, and then you realize when you go in the green room and they're like, taking their shoes off because they've been on their feet all day. They're real people. And Mike and Aaron and Keith, they're very, very personable and very, very aware and around, so that if you need help, like new authors, they can talk to these guys. These guys will help. That's how I got where I am.
Neat. So can you tell us specifically or tell our audience specifically what you did with them?
Yes. I did first of all, we did the Cases by Candlelight series, which is, the idea was, it was 4 original or traditional Sherlock Holmes stories, but I wanted one from Mike and Aaron, and we kind of put this thing together to see if it would work. Mike had never written a Sherlock Holmes story ever, so the first one he ever did was for me, and it worked very well. So we decided to do another one, and then I thought, well, because I'd written 2 of the stories, and then Mike and Aaron had written the other 2. I said, let's get a third person. So I approached Keith, and he resounding yes. And now we're about to do our third volume. So, but working with them is very, very fun. They are so creative all the time that they're always firing ideas, like it's never stopped. But when someone sends you a story that is a 10 times New York Times bestseller and says, let me know what you think of it.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great. Yeah. But yeah, collaboration is fun. I'm going to do some more collaborating this year, but I'm going to do something a little different. Rather than have individual stories written by some people, I'm going to collaborate where we write either two parts of the same story, or we write the entire story together. So that's kind of goals, really. But yeah, you would think. Here's my process now. I used to write my story first. Now I wait for theirs. Because the first time I'm like, oh my God, like I can't know. I've got to rewrite this or do. So I wait for their stories to come in, and then I generally write mine.
I was wondering how you do your collaborations. That's interesting because I mean, you each have your own writing style, but you got to make it mesh together so that it's one legitimate story.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like, Dina writes on her own. She doesn't have a collaborator. So what she puts out is what she feels.
Yeah.
Whereas you're working with it's almost like you're doing a job with somebody, and you've got to make sure that the two rails of the railroad tracks meet at the right location. Instead of being on your own, like I'm going to go this way and I'm going to go that way. And yeah.
I do want to say that even for people like me who quote unquote write on our own, between beta readers and my developmental editor and stuff, in a lot of ways, I'm not 100% on my own. There's a lot of external input that goes into the finished product. So I just want to kind of, it isn't like I'm not some amazing genius or whatever. There's other people.
Oh, come on.
Of
course
we
you
all
are.
We all know differently. We all know differently.
But
no, right.
Really, there's other people. I'm not alone in a box.
And same for me as well. I mean, it depends on the method by which you're doing the work. I mean, you've done short stories for anthologies as well, so it's very interesting collaborating because it's either really successful and very smooth, or it can be still successful but not quite so smooth, and trying to balance all of that. But my experience of creating 3 now anthology books and 2 more coming is that it's a great process. It's great fun, and you can get so much out of working with other people. Plus, it's great for them too because they can add their links to their own stuff in there. And one of the things that I offer, perhaps, which is why people do come to me, is that I offer proof that my stuff sells. So, and I never saw myself as a publisher, but I guess people are, because I published 2 books as a publisher rather than just as an author. But I think that's the way forward for me anyway. I mean, I would love to. Obviously, I'm still going to keep pitching to Titan Books and so on, but that's the way I run it.
Do you get a lot of people asking you, like aspiring writers asking you for advice?
Now, yes. I think I'm a bit more visual now. I wasn't, so I've done a few of the shore leaves and things, so I've grown my audience. But I do get asked that, and I think my answer is always the same, and that is that because I was dyslexic and for many, many years told I would never be able to do it, I did sort of avoid it for a while. And now I say to people, don't get your story out. Like, it doesn't matter about grammar and that yet. That stuff can all be fixed later. If you've got no story to fix, then there's nothing.
Yeah.
So get your story down, and I think that there's an old phrase in there, everybody's got at least one book in them. I think that's true. But what I do think is, if you can sit down and just sketch out your idea, however you want to do it, not be bogged down by the number of words you've got to write, and not be bogged down by the spelling or the grammar, and just write the story how you want it. When you go back to it, it's so much easier because you have the foundation.
Yep.
Allow the stream of consciousness to work. Just go through it, and when you're all done, What's that? Write first and ask questions later, I guess, if you want to say.
Or that
Yes.
phrase, you can't edit a blank page.
Yes.
Ooh, I like that.
Yes,
Yes.
that's much better. Yeah, it's a bit better.
Mhm.
And also, you should never. I mean, you of course edit your own stuff. We do that as a standard. I think we do it as we go along and then afterwards. But always, if you can, that's my advice to any aspiring new writer: is if you're not sure how to fix something with grammar and so on, then pay an editor to fix it. Then you will be able to see all the changes yourself and see where they've corrected it. And that's what I did. I look at what my editor is seeing, what repetitive mistakes I'm making, and then I'm trying to correct them. It's
Is it
fun.
more continuity that your editor is looking for, as opposed to just this simple thing like grammar and spelling and blah like that? Are they looking to make sure that that things are happening in an order that is logical and entertaining
and non-repetitive? Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, for example, my editor will say, "Hey, we said this in paragraph 3 in the last chapter. It's similar. Do you really need it?" And those are the questions that I get when he goes through my edits. He'll highlight sections and say, "This information we've been given twice. This is really not necessary unless you're reiterating it for a reason," and so on. And also like stuff like, I don't know if this has happened to you, Adina, but when I write, sometimes I create what I call a style sheet. And it has like all the names and everything in it, because the first time I sat down, I had a guy in a story called Dave, and by the end of it, he was Robin. I don't.
I've done that. Yeah. I've done that.
There's a continuity question. Whoops.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Yep. I don't know how that happened.
Yep, I have done exactly that.
And do you, when your editor comes back and says, you need to make these changes, do you just say, "I see your point. You're correct. I'm gonna make these changes," or do you go, "No. This is gold to begin with. What are you talking about? This is the best there could possibly be."
So I know people like that who will say, "Yeah, thank you for your advice, but I'm good. I won't change it." No. First thing I do, I look at it and then I hit accept all, and then I'll address the comments. I send my work to an editor for a reason. I don't need to second guess him if he's edited it. And so that's just me though, right? I mean, a lot of people do fight to the death to hold one sentence in their story, and I understand it because it's come out of you. It's your creativity. But for me, no, I'm happy if once the editor has it's already kind of in my mind, I've now left it. And I'm moving on to the next story. So, and then when it comes back, I generally go through the edits, but for his grammar edits, I just accept them because they're always very good. So I think you have to have a good relationship with your editor. That's the key. He knows exactly what I'm writing, and he knows exactly what I'm trying to do. So if I screw up or there's an element in the story that doesn't make sense to him, he's highlighting that to me right away and saying, "Hey, look at this. I don't understand what this is." And that's really helpful too.
That's great.
Yep.
That's great.
I completely agree with that concept of it is a relationship, and you have to find the person that works with you. The woman who I use, she completely gets the voice I'm trying to achieve.
That's the key.
And that's yes.
And there's nothing worse than getting a manuscript back from somebody who just didn't get it. And so they've just edited it for errors and not really taken any time. And you think, well, these aren't actually errors, but yeah. So having an editor that knows your stuff is great.
Yeah. Or in my writer's critique group, there were a couple of times this one person who I love dearly. He's a great guy, and I like the stuff that he writes, but he would critique my stuff where he attempted to change my dialogue.
No, you don't do
that's like no. This is how the character speaks.
If it's in quotes, leave it alone.
But so you're under no obligation to take it. Well, so in a critique group, this is critique. You are under no obligation to take it. And even with an editor, I'm paying this person. I am under no obligation to take what they suggest. But I agree with Cris. I am paying them for a reason. While generally 99% of the time I accept what they do, grammar wise, I accept what they do. But some of the other word choice or whatever, I might be I take note that they pointed it out, something obviously struck them, as a reason to point something out. But it depends on the situation. But yes,
You're right.
I paid them for a reason.
Yeah, and it's the same as cover artists and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
these people are all skilled. They're all different
Yes.
skills. I don't
Mhm.
have the skill to do covers. I can do interiors of books and not till the cows come home, but I'm not an artist in that regard. So
So
that's.
what are you working on? What are you working on right now?
I'm just starting the new series of books that were going to come out this year. I just finished Four Calling Birds, that published at the December 25th. That's a Sherlock Holmes anthology of 4 stories, but they're all linked in small ways. And so what happened was I developed that, and I liked the idea of the East End of London, and these 4 stories kind of go from 1880 to 1901. So there's like a 20-year gap. And then this new set that I'm working on now, one starts in Blessington Street, which is where the first 2 episodes of that, and they're all connected, and then the next one and the next one. So my intention is to write all 3 back to back as one big story and then split it up. And then that will give me my March, June, and September books that I publish. And then I'm going to Eliminate the Impossible with Keith, Mary, and Derek at the end of this year, and A Cases by Candlelight with me, Aaron, and Mark, and Keith. Yeah, so busy. And I just pitched for Weird Tales as well, so we'll see what happens with that.
Excellent. So for someone who wants to start reading your Sherlock Holmes novels, do you recommend just starting at the beginning and going in order, or does it matter? Or
it doesn't matter. Each story is independently solved, so it's just like one story. The series links them, but that's it. There's no, you have to read this one in order to understand. No, I never wanted that, because I figured with 16 of them, I don't want to put people in the position where they can't figure out which one to start with. So pick any, doesn't matter. These 3 that are coming out this year, Jeff and I decided that we wanted to do something a little different. Rather than write 3 individual cases that, like I do normally, we're going to write this whole series. Each story will have a resolution of that story's crime, so no one feels cheated, but the next book will start the next segment of that story, and the third. And so that's my plan. But the first 2 stories go up to the point where Sherlock Holmes dies and disappears, and the last one is when he returns. So that's interesting. That's where I'm going with this. Yeah.
So can I ask you this question, Christopher? Is this your full-time gig?
Yeah.
Are you so your income, your lifestyle, everything that you comes from your publishing these short stories, these novellas, novels, whatever.
Yes.
Was it scary when you decided that you're going to make this your full-time gig? That you're going am I going to be writing from a soup kitchen at some point, or will I be able to, afford a home and everything that goes with it?
So yes, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, because like everyone else, I worked from the moment I could work till, at a place. When I moved to America, that was no different. I worked at Staples for a small period of time, and then became a general manager for them, and I ran about 8 stores in Connecticut. And I was just used to going to work. And so what I had to do was, first of all, take a 2/3 pay cut and then try and see if we can make it work. And I was very fortunate that my husband at the time wasn't my husband, but we talked about it, and it came at 2020. So it was COVID.
Wow.
We were right in the middle of the pandemic. Jeff was stuck in Minnesota for most of it. I was here. Then I was doing like more sort of nursing based CNA stuff, but we decided this was the right time. I mean, everything went that way. So for me, the pandemic was a huge uplift, because I was able to do this, and it took a year and a half before we saw any financial gain from it, which was scary.
Yes.
But now, I do it full time. And I'm very happy doing it that way.
That's great, to be able to do that, because it's you're giving up something that's a sure thing. Working at Staples, and going, okay, I'm going to write, and I hope people read it, and then they buy it, and then I get to do it some more, and you keep going, and it's self-perpetuating.
Yeah.
And you still have to keep churning out new material. You have to constantly be, I have to, this is my job. I have to keep building. And is it daunting, or is it, like, I love doing this every day?
It was daunting. It was daunting. I think more so because I do suffer with anxiety a little bit, like a lot of people. And so I'm always conscious, like, if I see my sales have dropped, my first reaction is, oh my God, this is it. The bubble's burst. I better get out and find a proper job. And then, then the next day it's twice as many as it. So I've been worried about this bubble bursting since 2020. And I did 18 consecutive days at #1 with my new book.
That's great.
Which is
amazing.
Which is where I've got to, which is what I've been trying to get to. And yeah, but yeah, it was terribly daunting.
Even the same case of moving from the UK to the USA?
Not so much. That wasn't daunting because I had somewhere to go and I had a plan and everything was going to be kind of like, we worked it out. It took me well over a year and a half to even get all of the stuff done with the American consulate to come here. I mean, it was a long process. But what happened was, and what kickstarted my writing career, I guess, was when I moved here, they wouldn't give me a work permit at the American embassy. But when I landed and I was going through the immigration, with my whole life in 4 bags,
Oh, wow.
And I presented the guy, he says, what are you going to do for work? And I said, I don't know, but if you stamp it, I might be able to. And he, bang. So I was able to work pretty much right away. But then when I was transitioning from my visa to my permanent residence card, there was a period of 4 months where I was not allowed to work.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote a book.
Okay.
Nice. That's cool.
Good use of your time.
Yeah.
So speaking of time, I'm going to try to segue into the times that we're going to get to see you, Cris, at upcoming conventions.
Sure. Yes. I think we're at both of the ones, aren't we? Yeah. So Trek to Long Island in May, June, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That weekend that crosses the month. Yeah. And all of us will be there. The whole Sci-Fi podcast will be there.
It's going to be great.
Oh, yeah. That's
meet you in person.
Yeah. That's cool. Oh, I'm pleased about that.
It's actually exciting because a number of the people we have interviewed on this show will be there as guests of the show, whatever, of the event, and it's going to be like old times, which is great.
I have to say that Stephanie, who runs the Trek Long Island, is absolutely incredible. I mean, she's done such an amazing job. And the first one was great. And then the second one I'm going this year to will be the DNI. Is that right? DNI Con?
Yep, it's the Galactic DNI in Philly. In the middle of April, and I will be there with you at that one.
Mike and I are coming to that one. We've both been invited to that, so that's really cool.
And I think that will be my first opportunity to meet him.
Oh, were you not at? He was at the Trek Long Island last time. Did you not meet him then?
I must not. Well, because we were very busy doing big sci-fi podcast.
I will make sure. I will make sure to introduce you guys because he'll be there for Trek Long Island as well.
Yes. So so you and I think we'll be there. Those two. So it's just those two for you this year,
those
right now?
Just confirmed. Yeah, those are 2 confirmed ones. I always do shore leave, but this year we may not be able to because the date for that is over my 50th birthday weekend. So
I know because it's my 50th birthday weekend too.
I know.
You guys have too much in common. Stop it.
Yeah. I'm not sure we're going to make it.
Cris, you're one day older than me, or one day younger than me?
I'm July 30th.
Oh, I'm 2 days older than you.
There you go. You don't look it.
So, Cris, respect your elders, okay?
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
I think that brings us to the end of our fascinating journey with Christopher D. Abbott. Thank you, Cris, for being here so much.
Thank you.
You've taken us on a truly captivating voyage. Thank you for sharing your insights and your stories with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
To our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us today. And there will be links to Chris's books in the show notes. And your homework is to check out some of his work, even if you haven't already. Now, if you want to interact and chat with us, you can join our Facebook group or find us on Instagram or Twitter, or you can always drop us a note at thebigscifipodcast@gmail.com. And I want to give a shout out to the Trek Geeks Podcast Network. We're very proud to be part of the Trek Geeks Network. And in addition to the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, you'll find other really cool and entertaining podcasts there, like the Sci-Fi Sisters. And all three of us, Trek Geeks, the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, and Sci-Fi Sisters, you'll find all of us as part of the podcast crew at Trek Long Island in that May-June timeframe. So everyone get your tickets right now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's only elementary.
Yeah, I have avoided doing that.
Oh, but I had to. I'm sorry.
No.
So
Don't apologize because I think it's got to a point now where I'm looking forward to doing it. You know what I'm saying? Because I have avoided saying it entirely, and it's coming. It's like some of the things that Holmes does. There's only one time in my story where he plays a violin. That's it.
Well, everybody, until next time, treat your fellow life forms with respect and care, and may you live long and prosper till we reconvene for the Big Sci-Fi Podcast.